Clayton, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, appreciate it.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Clay Cranford. I am a retired sergeant from the Orange County Sheriff's Department. I did 20 years in law enforcement. And the majority of that career, the best part of my career, was working with students and families. I was a school resource officer in a Southern Orange County, California city, Rancho Santa Margarita. I had 14,000 students in that city. I was the one and only school resource officer, so I was very busy handling issues. And this was in 2012, which incidentally is the major adoption of smartphones by teens. So 2010 was kind of the the iPhone was out there. It was kind of gaining traction, but the majority of children who had phones had flip phones, right? And then in about 2012, it flipped where the majority had smartphones. So I was kind of, as it was happening, witnessing what Jonathan Haidt in his book Anxious Generation calls the rewiring of our children's brains. And so I was dealing with those things. And all those things kind of amounted to a very simple, but a very common narrative, which was a good kid who made a bad choice and a parent who had no idea what was going on. So as I saw these things happening, I'm like, and some of the cases that I was dealing with were really heartbreaking. And I'm a parent too, right? And about this time, I had two boys who were kind of in that middle school years. So it was, this was very personal to me. It's also happening in my home. But, as a parent sitting across from another parent and them just, weeping and asking for guidance in a situation that, can't be undone. And so I just said, I'm not interested in helping pick up the pieces. I'm really interested in giving parents the tools that they need to be an effective parent in the digital world. And also talk to students about the choices that they're making and how to be safer. It led to me writing a book called Parenting in the Digital World in 2015. And since then, I travel all the United States, speaking at schools. It's to students K through 12 now, which is interesting because I didn't start talking to children that young. This is something that's happened recently. But kindergartner all the way through 12th grade, and then talking to parents. And so that's kind of where this all began. And I know you're interested in maybe knowing what was the real turning point for me.
Yeah.
So the turning point for me was literally my first day as a school resource officer. I walked into my intermediate school here in Rancho Santa Margarita, and it was like a pretty big school, like 1,200 students. And I was greeted by the front desk person who said, "Deputy Cranford, we're so glad you're here." But she said it kind of more hysterically. She's like, we're so glad you're here because there's a student waiting for you back in your office. So I go back to my office, and there's this little 7th grade, 12-year-old girl sitting in one of the chairs with her knees, tucked up under her chin. She's, holding, kind of holding herself, crying. And there was a counselor back there waiting for me. And I learned that over the summer, her then 6th grade boyfriend asked her to send him a nude image, which, if you don't know, this is what kids do to prove they're in a committed relationship. So unfortunately, she did. And like all relationships in 6th grade, they break up eventually. Yeah. And of course, that image doesn't break up. It goes on forever. And the nights leading up to her first day in 7th grade, she had multiple messages from boys from that school, friends of his, messaging her saying, we have an image of you. Send us a nude image too. Oh. So just imagine if you're that little 12-year-old girl, walking into your first day of 7th grade thinking everybody in the school has this image of me. I mean, the fact that she got out of bed that morning she's a brave girl. Yeah. But yeah, that's where I found her, and her life was imploding, and the next steps were calling those boys in, making them delete the image, and there was school discipline involved. But what really made the impression on me was when I sat down with her mom and I had this conversation with her mom, and again, a conversation I'd had over and over again with parents. And that mom looked at me and she said, how do we keep this from happening? Or how do we keep this from happening again? So I didn't have a good answer for her just
Yeah.
then. I was kind of new to the position. And I realized parents need that answer. And not just again, but keep it from ever happening. And what I learned was that there are things that parents can do to absolutely make a difference. Now, can't say we can make it 100% safe. There's no such thing.
Yeah.
But we can do a lot. And so that's kind of been my goal since then. We've talked to, hundreds of thousands of students, tens of thousands of parents over the last, decade. And we have a strong educational piece on our website for parents and students. So we're just looking for ways to make a difference, and it's important for us to do it now because our kids' mental health, which is tightly tied to this technology, is collapsing. And so I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But it's something that we just can't ignore anymore. And if we do, we're doing it at our children's peril, frankly.
So what is the best process for you and I to talk about this here? Should we talk about it in terms of platforms and issues, or should we start working through age groups? Like, where would you normally go in this discussion? Because I could think of okay, let's start at, kindergarten. We now have to start talking about these things because I see kids,
Right.
toddlers know how to use phones.
I think maybe to start off, maybe let's talk about kind of how we got here. I mean, I want to talk about the mental health
Yeah.
issue because this one is, and I want to talk about um, sexual exploitation. I'm really burdened by what's happening to our young people, and I have parents calling me on a weekly basis saying, this happened to my kid, and it's also kind of just to some degree kind of coupled with the mental health issue. But yeah, I think maybe we should talk about kind of how this technology has changed our kids and its effect, and us as parents are facilitating this, right? Because our kids aren't getting jobs and buying their own phones, right? Like
Yeah.
we're doing it for them, and like you said, kindergartner. Like, how does a kindergartner get a phone? So
Because I mean, I think the important thing is that when you and I were in school, maybe maybe we had a beeper when we were in college,
right, I did have a pager.
And so like our youth experience, we were kind of pre-internet or right around the cusp of when the internet came out, and so our youth is fundamentally different, and we can't do what we did.
Yeah.
We can't use the rules that we did when we were kids.
Yeah, our children's generation, like my boys are now, 21 and 23, and they're in college, and they're kind of the Gen Z crowd generation. They're radically different than us in the way they were raised. And there's a really terrific book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and also iGen by Dr. Twenge. And both of them basically explain how the technology, the phone, the smartphones, and social media has really fundamentally changed our children, and in just so many ways. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around. But just on a really basic level, maybe looking at. So I work with a lot of school counselors and a lot of school psychologists, and they say we are alarmed, like I quote, end quote, we are alarmed at the number of children who are struggling with anxiety and depression, which are they're kind of related, mental health issues. Um, and the schools are, trying to bring more counselors in, and they're trying to deal with these kids who are having, are contemplating, suicide, who say that they're hopeless and lonely. And like what happened here? And when we look at the data, because there's children are given a survey in public schools every year, and it's like the healthy generator. It's a standardized thing that they give, and basically a lot of the questions are like within the last 30 days. Have you had thoughts of loneliness? Like, and they have like a bunch
Yeah.
of questions. Like, last 30 days, have you smoked a cigarette? So, like, that's one of the ways we also know about tobacco use with teens as well.
And this that's gone back. I seem to vaguely remember this
Yes.
in high school that I was doing this. However many generation,
Yes,
however many
it goes
decades
back a
ago that
long
was.
ways. So we have
Gotcha.
data for when we were kids. Like, it goes back a long ways. And uh And so we look, so this is self-reporting, right? This is what the kids are saying about themselves. So when we look at before 2010, so 2010 is kind of the beginning of the shift to smartphones, but 2012 is kind of like to 2014 is kind of like when 80+% of teens were on smartphones. Um, the rates of anxiety, depression were flat. So it was pretty flat like this for boys it was really low. And girls have always been higher by, something like 5% of teens from 2004, 2010. Boys were actually were experiencing depressive disorders. And girls were like somewhere between, 12 to like 10 to 12, like right in there. But then 2010 comes around, it looks like a hockey stick. It goes like this.
Oh,
And and so right now in 2020, girls, it's almost 30% of girls say that report having a depressive disorder. That's like deep depression for more than a couple of weeks. So that's not just like feeling sad one day. It's consistent, clinically probably diagnosable depression. That went up 145% since 2010. And boys, although the curve isn't quite as dramatic because they already started out very low. So now they're like around 12%. They were at 5 to 12. So it's like 161% increase for boys. So, and then we translate that into, well, like, what else does that mean? I mean, that also includes, huge increases in non-suicidal self-injury. That was something that I got exposed to as a school resource officer that I didn't know anything about. Children who are injuring themselves because it's a way of dealing with their emotions. It's a type of emotional regulation, but it's
yeah.
cutting. And um for girls that's up 188%. For boys it's up 49% since 2010. And when you sit across from a parent who didn't know that this was going on with their kid, we had a girl who was posting this on Instagram, right? Like a lot of kids talk about self-harm. It's kind of the drama
Hmm.
that kids talk about on social media, which isn't unusual, which is strange, right? Like you'd think talking about hurting yourself would be unusual, but not so much on social media now. And this girl then posts this image of her inner forearm just slashed to pieces.
Oh,
Very, very graphic. And one of the kids at the school brought it to my attention. So we call this girl in, sit down with a counselor. She's not a risk to kill herself, but she's this is a very compulsive situation that she's dealing with and just struggling with anxiety and depression. And then we call that mom in, and that mom, we first talk to the mom, kind of prep her for what's going to happen, and then we go into the room with her, and that girl slides the long sleeves of her shirt up, and to hear the gasp of horror and despair
mm.
like emanating from a parent like that was like everybody in that room felt sick. And and that and those scars, they don't just go away. And those scars are metaphorically not just on her arm, but that soul of that parent, because that parent's like, I failed my child. Like, I should have known this was going on. If she had looked at her child's Instagram for even a moment, she would have known. So, no, some kids really struggle. No kid's unaffected. Like, all kids on social media are affected. It's changing the way they socialize. It changes, it increases anxiety for sure. But some kids really, really struggle. And I was talking to a friend today, actually, this morning, and he's like, what do we have to do to get apathetic parents involved? And I said, when enough parents have children who are attempting suicide, then parents will coalesce and they'll say, we need to stop this. We need to change this, what's happening here. Because we have parents who are giving their little kids a phone because all the other kids in
Yeah.
the class have a phone. So they feel like, well, if I don't give my kid a phone, they're going to be ostracized. So the flip side of that would be parents coming together and say, hey, as a parent group at this school, we're going to say no smartphones, no phones for our kids until they're middle school, and no smartphones for our kids until they're in high school. Like if parents could do that, and then the next thing would be no social media until
Yeah.
they're 16. And I say that to a lot of parent groups, and you have a lot of parents who are like, who have young children who don't have phones yet. They're like, yes, right? Because they don't have anything at stake. But you
Yeah.
have other parents who have kids who have phones already, and they're like, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know
Yeah.
if I can take it all back. But I have parents who have children who are victims of online sexual exploitation, or kids who've attempted or hurt themselves, attempted suicide or hurt themselves, and they have no compunction about taking it all away. They don't even care anymore. Like
Yeah.
your safety and your health is more important to me than you not connecting with your friends on Snapchat. So parents have to care about this as much as parents that this hasn't happened to their kid yet, as much as parents who've had it happen to their kid. That's really what we need. And
Yeah.
and we can turn this mental health problem around with our kids. It starts with the introduction of social media and these devices in our children's lives. So I'm sorry, that was a very
Yeah.
long winded, but I think that's like fundamentally one of the huge problems that we have and one of the biggest hurdles that we have to get over.
So why is social media causing, or what's your impression of why is social media causing the mental health crisis, the
Right.
anxiety?
Yeah, so it starts early. So with young kids, so a lot of parents are using devices to help their children regulate their emotions. So you have a kid who's acting out, who's unhappy, who's sad, like or just being a regular kid, which is squawky or whatever. They just they give them an iPad, and it totally it's like a 180, right? Like the kid's
Yeah.
crying, oop, I got an iPad, now I'm all good, and I totally get it. Like as a parent, you're overwhelmed. You got a lot going on. And if there's something that you could just give, like basically pacify your child, like why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, you're out at a restaurant and your kid has a meltdown,
Yeah.
which
You're like,
happens
everybody
to
wants to
every
have,
kid in every restaurant ever. But I can understand, I don't
yeah,
have kids, but I can understand the feeling of, oh gosh, everybody's looking at me. I must be a horrible parent.
yeah.
Here's this thing that I can give my kid, and instantaneously, it's not an issue.
Like, why wouldn't you? Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. But even the American Academy of Pediatrics says, if your child's under 18 months, zero screens, zero. But like I'm sure my dad in the late 1970s, in a car, family car trip to, where we're going, to up to the Yosemite or something. I'm sure he would have liked to have not had to like spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror at me and my brothers and saying, "Stop touching your brother," right?
Yeah.
Or leave your, like, or reaching back there with his arm trying to like smack one of us. Like I'm sure he would have liked to and just give us phones or a screen and just have a
Oh, yeah.
peaceful drive. I'm sure it just wasn't an option, right? But so we're giving these devices to kids to sublimate them, to pacify them, but really what's happening here is that our children are never learning to deal with their emotions. There's no emotional regulation happening. And then when we have teens, the feelings of anxiety or negative emotions. So this is kind of interesting. So like negative emotions, like what we call negative emotions would be like anxiety, fear, shame. These are not a bug. These are a feature, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why we're feeling these things, and it's not all bad. And in fact, it's good. Like when you do something wrong, you should feel shame. If you didn't do well on your test at school and you didn't get a good score, you're like, wow, I feel horrible that I didn't do well. I'm going to work harder next time, right? Or um, I'm procrastinating for that test. I'm getting anxious. I need to study. Like, so these are things that are good. But what's happened is that as a society, to some degree, we're saying, negative emotions are bad, all of them. So you should never feel them. So it's better to, get in front of a device or use these devices to sublimate. And one of the things, like, girls are on social media because they're more social, want to socially interact, and boys are more likely to be like on YouTube or playing games. But they kind of work in different ways. Like playing games, it does mute your emotions.
Hmm.
The way neurologically, the way it works. And if you want to kind of know more about this, there's a book called The Healthy Gamer that's written by a psychiatrist, and he kind of goes into the brain science. So it's really fascinating. But even as an adult, like if you want to jump on a video game and you ask an adult, why do you do that? They're like, I'm just decompressing.
Yeah.
Right? It makes sense. It's like it does something to your brain that kind of you can kind of forget about things and you just kind of go into this world. And that's what these devices have done. And then for girls, and the reason why girls are faring the worst, it's from several reasons. One is that because of social comparison. So girls are very social and they socially compare themselves to others. And you have a young, especially like uh somebody like going through puberty, right? Why did Gen Z during 2010 to 2016 have the worst outcomes with their mental health? But then you have the millennials who are just a little bit older than them, same access to technology, the same technology at the same time, did not change much,
Hmm.
very little. And it has a lot to do with this kind of informative time in your life, going through puberty. You're just, a very awkward person, and you're very, not sure about, how you look and how you're kind of socially fitting in with people. Like middle school is really hard for kids trying to fit in. It's a very awkward time. So there, you're a girl, going through puberty, middle school, and you are looking at images of other girls on here that have been, perfected through filters and other things like
Yeah.
that. And you're looking at that and you're comparing yourself. You're like, I'm not, I don't look this great. But I need to look this great. Like, and there's a lot of anxiety about that. And just look at the number of very young girls who are buying, skincare products. Like you have, 8-year-olds, going to, Ulta Beauty, buying skincare products. Why? Like they have perfect skin, right? It's because of, um, this stuff that's being kind of purveyed on social media. And then you have, so when we look at the statistics on this, so students in surveys who say they're satisfied with themselves up to 2010 actually was going up. So they're feeling more satisfied about
Yeah.
themselves. 2011, it nosedives down. So it went from like 2011 for girls, it was like 67% of girls said they were satisfied. And now it's down to like 57%. And boys have a very similar decline, just not as low. So they started out higher, not as low, but the percent change is about the same. So, and how many close friends did they have? Kids are today. So 2011, um, percent of students who said they have close friends was like in the high 70 percentile. Now it's in the mid to low 60 percentile. So they're changing real life face to face
Yeah.
relationships that are meaningful, right? Because they're face to face. With They went from quality to quantity. Now they have lots of friends online, but they're not
Close to
meaningful
anything. Yeah.
relationships. So and also predation, right? And girls are more likely to be preyed on online than boys, although there's this, we'll talk about, there's this scam that's very prevalent where young teen boys or not just young teen, but young adults, male young adults are being preyed on by scammers through sexual exploitation. So all these it is really complicated. There's a lot going on
Yeah.
here, but all these things have kind of aggregated, rewired our children's brains in a way that we can actually undo. We can actually undo it. It won't happen immediately, but but it's something I think that, again, we have to do it. I'm just afraid that parents who are kind of on the sidelines and not overly concerned about it because they're like thinking this can't happen to my kid won't do it until the point where the suicide rate is so high or the attempt suicide rate is so high that it cannot be ignored. When we have multiple children in a school attempting or committing suicide, that school those parents will stand up and say something has to change.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to happen, right? Hopefully we can kind of turn the ship around before that happens.
So you were saying that for one generation there was this big shift, but for Gen Z there wasn't as much of that shift in this age group.
Yeah.
Did I misunderstand that, or
no, you got no.
is Gen Z not?
So Gen Z. So like my children, Gen Z is like born from like 1997 to 2004 or five. It's like that range right there. They got smartphones and social media while they were going through puberty. The older kids, the millennials, did not have they got the technology at the same time. They did not have the mental health problems.
Okay, I had it backwards.
So what we're seeing is every new generation of children who are being introduced to social media at earlier and earlier ages, it's just making the mental health outcomes even worse. But the Gen Z were the first generation.
Gotcha.
And so that's and it's not just an American problem. They see this exact same thing in South Korea, the UK, and Germany. Every country that of children that age exposed to this technology, the same time, same generation, same outcomes, very similar outcomes. So there's a lot of naysayers who are like, well, and I'm not saying it's all because of that. Like you can't say that the current mental health crisis is only because of social media. I think you can lay a lot of it at the feet of it and the phones, but I can't say all of it. There's a high correlation, but it's not just an American problem. This is in Australia is another one. It's happening worldwide, and it started in 2010.
Yeah, I mean and I think it's probably hard. Gosh, there's that generational difference makes it difficult because you and I we'll go out and play with your friends until the streetlights come on and then come home, and it was ride your bikes, build forts, beat each other up in person.
Right.
It was in real life interactions, and you're kind of left to your own devices to figure it out.
Yeah, our parents, that generation was pretty hands off. And I guess, and the other component of this, in Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, he talks about about the parenting shift. So we went from our generation of parents who were just like come back when the lights turn on, when the street lights turn on. Like it's like they have no idea where we were. I remember I was living in I went to high school in Palm Desert, and I'm 16. We have a car. Like when you turn 16, our generation, you wanted to drive. Our kids, they're driving much later. All the things happening later. But my buddy and I would jump in my car and we drive to Joshua Tree and we just camp out. And my parents had no idea. I think they had a general sense I was camping out somewhere. They didn't know where I was. There's no phones. So, so things changed radically. So we kind of went from this kind of hands-off parenting style to a very helicopter fear-based parenting style, and or the bulldozer parenting, where they just push all the obstacles out of the way of their kid because they want their kid to have a very easy, relaxed, life.
Mm-hmm.
But what they've done is really the opposite. You couple that with the technology. We have kids who don't know how to deal with adversity. I mean, if you're a kid growing up in our generation, if you wanted to go on a date, you had to go look at someone in the face and say, would you like to go on a date with me? And I just think about all the anxiety that builds up prior to that. You're thinking, oh, she might say yes, she might say no. You're like playing it all in your head. And then the moment, right? And then you have to do it. And then you live with the outcome, right? And it could be that, it didn't work out well. And there's some social consequences for you because she's going to go around and say, I told Clay I wasn't going to go on a date with him, And so it gets around the school like, oh, Clay got dumped on the first date or whatever. So our kids don't have that anymore. And that's good. If you need to learn that experience when you're young in school or whatever, because it's a safe place to crash and burn.
Hmm.
And our kids are never getting that now. And now they're resorting to, online relationships, which have zero stakes, right? There's no downside to getting dumped online. And now we have AI boyfriends and girlfriends, which are kind of emerging. So now you can have like a perfect online boyfriend or girlfriend who will never say no or anything to you. There's no give and take. There's no sacrifice, right, to please another person, in the sense that I have to like put my wants a
Yeah.
little bit behind this other person to have this relationship. Like you need to learn how to do that. Like you can't have a successful marriage,
Yeah.
for instance, if you don't do that. So there's all these kinds of like other things that are happening here. But yeah, our parenting style today has really created this situation to some degree. And so we have kids who are not really well prepared. And ironically, parents are really scared. The reason why parents are giving their children phones at early and earlier ages, I've talked to tens of thousands of parents. I've asked a lot of them. And I'm talking to, okay, so I'm a first grade class, right? I'm teaching cyber safety to first graders.
Yeah.
Actually, we do K through 3.
So first graders are 7 years old ish,
Yeah,
six, seven,
something like
eight,
that.
somewhere in that range.
So usually we do a block. We do K through 3 because it's the same presentation for that whole group. And it's very kind of fun and light. We got cartoons and stuff. It's very age appropriate. And but I started off with the presentation by saying, raise your hand if you have a phone. Half the hands go up.
Oh,
So half the kids in there, and then raise your hand if you have TikTok or something, and then like half those hands go up. And so I'm asking parents, why are you giving your kid, your first grade or whatever, a phone? And they're afraid. They're afraid that I need to be able to contact my child anytime during the day because of their safety. Well, I'm like, well, if you're taking your child from home to school and then picking them up from school and bringing them home, why do you need a phone in that situation? It's not like they're out, wandering the fields,
yeah.
after school or something. And because if you need to talk to your kid, you can just call the front office. They'll find your kid. Parents will say basically two things. They'll say, one, I'm worried about my child being abducted.
Yeah.
And the other one is school shootings.
Hmm.
So when you look at, then I ask parents, like, where should we put our concern? Like, what should be the focus of our concern? Are we concerned about the possibility of anything bad happening to our kid? Like what is anything above zero something we need to be overly concerned about? Or is it only the things that are really kind of in the threat matrix for our kid, right?
Yeah.
Only about 100 kids a year get abducted by strangers. And we have like 72 million children in the United States. So the chances of your child being abducted by a stranger, mostly they get abducted by
Yeah.
family members.
You and I, stranger danger.
Yeah, stranger danger. It's like 0.00006% of kids, And then you look at like, well, what about school shootings? Like in the last 20 years, only 215 children have been either injured or killed in a school shooting. And so that's like 0.0004 or something like that percent of kids. But if you look at the number of kids who are suffering anxiety, depression, who are committing suicide, who are hurting themselves, we're talking about things that are like tens of 1,000% more likely to happen to your kid.
Yeah.
And most parents, I think, probably know a kid who's seeking, mental health help, or maybe their kid is because of anxiety, depression, or something else. So we're giving them devices for something that is highly unlikely. I mean, if this ever happened to your kid and you're watching this podcast, you're maybe chucking something at the screen right now.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this doesn't ever happen. And if it does happen to your family, it's beyond devastating. I mean, God forbid it would ever happen to anyone. But I'm talking about like the average family. This is really not something we need to be concerned about. Like the chance of your child being victimized by a stranger is so low. Like it was way more dangerous in the 80s.
Yeah.
We were kids than it is now.
Or
In fact,
was it?
your child, like a child is more likely to be physically injured, sexually abused, or murdered in their home. Way more likely than at a school or outside your own home. So if you're not the kind of parent who's going to do that to your kid, you don't have a lot to worry about, frankly.
Yeah.
What you do need to worry about is their mental health, and we're giving them phones because we're worried about this thing that is really not a thing, and inadvertently opening up a world to our kid that should never have been available to them. And now they're being victimized in all sorts of ways that wouldn't have been available otherwise.
So you talked about undoing this, and I
Mhm.
can see two levels of undoing this, and you're probably more experienced in talking about one. There's the stop, prevent it from happening going forward, but then there's, okay, the people who have now been exposed to all this growing up, as they become adults or later teens, trying to undo
Mhm.
what has already happened with them. So
Right.
which undo do you want to talk about?
Well, I think in a perfect world, what I'd like to see happen is parents. So if you're a parent and you haven't given your child a phone or social media yet, so for you, I would say do not give your child a smartphone until they're in high school. So if your child's in middle school and you're like, you know what, I have a legitimate reason for my child to have a phone. Like they ride their bike to baseball practice after school, and I just want them, like, okay, I get it. Give them a non-smartphone. Give them a flip phone, give them an Apple Watch or something like that where they can communicate with you but not have access to apps in the internet.
Mhm.
And have a phone, right? That has a camera looking at them. And then when they're in high school, then you can give them a smartphone, and then I wouldn't give them social media until sometime later. I would recommend 16. And that just and although that's going to be a tough sell
Yeah.
for when a kid gets high school, if you give your child a smartphone, you must put an app on your child's phone that will help regulate screen time for them. Because also the amount of time they spend on devices also impacts their mental health. And then also something that might alert you if something dangerous is happening with your child. So the app that we recommend at Cyber Safety Cop. In fact, my instructors who have children are using it on their children's phones. It's Ourpact, OURPACT.
Hmm.
They're a California company, care about kids. They're everybody there is our parents. And it works on iPhones, which is kind of awesome because there's other apps out there that you can install on an iPhone, but it kind of struggles because the iPhone's operating system is
Yeah.
not very friendly to these types of apps. So our pact uses the device management part of the operating system, so it's really kind of seamless. And it'll even grab screenshots of what your child's doing on their phone, including Snapchat, and use optical character recognition, run that through a database. If it sees some words in there that are problematic, sends you a notification. That would have saved a lot of kids that I know.
Yeah.
That as soon as they sent or someone says, "Hey, send me a nude" or whatever, like that would have gotten flagged for
Yeah.
that parent. And then during the school day, kids should not be on phones. All schools should have a policy that no phones are out bell to bell. Um, But if your kid has a phone using RPAC, you could actually shut down every app on their phone except their ability to call or text,
Mm.
right? So that would help.
Yeah.
At night, that device does not belong in their bedroom. So no technology in a child's bedroom, especially after lights out. I don't think they should be in their bedroom, period. I just like you put an Xbox in a kid's room, you've increased their time on the Xbox statistically by more than 50%. So put it in a public area of the house where you can kind of drop in and check on things. But at night, when that light goes out, leaving that phone or that device, whatever it is, in their bedroom increases anxiety, increases their likelihood to um, do something inappropriate, sending nude images, looking at pornography. All those things shoot up after like 11 p.m. on these devices. So that's an easy fix. And then so for parents who have kids who already have devices and maybe are already and okay, and the other thing too is I recommend visit my website,
Hmm.
cybersafetycop.com. My book, Parenting in the Digital World, calmly walks you through how to talk to your kid about this stuff. A lot of this is how to talk to your kid.
Yeah.
Um, and talk to your kid in a way that's not intuitive. Because our parent intuitive way of talking to kids is telling them what to do, like talking down to them, say, this is what you have to do, blah, blah, blah. And when you give your kid a phone, they have options. They don't have to listen to you.
Yeah.
So really what you want to do is you want to recruit them to be on your side. And one of the things I do in my presentation is I give some parents tools on this. And actually the tools come from when I was a hostage negotiator. I was a hostage negotiator for the sheriff's department. And parents laugh because it does, when you're talking to your kid about screen time, it kind of does feel like a hostage negotiation to some degree. But how do we get, in a hostage negotiation, how do we get somebody to come out of a house? Like they're barricaded inside of a house, the police are surrounding it. Like, how do we get that person out? And it's not by telling them, get out now. Like, that doesn't work. They have options. We do it by building a rapport, trying to understand where this person is coming from, listen to them, and then once they feel like you're trying to understand them, they start opening up to you. Then you start giving them options of like, how can we figure this out together?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the goal. So your kid's like, hey, I need to have Snapchat to have a relationship with friends at school. And so maybe my recommendation is not to give your child Snapchat until they're in college. All right. So I've just seen too much. I've written too many search warrants for Snapchat. I've seen too many kids crash and burn on Snapchat. Never had a parent say, give my child Snapchat. That was a great choice.
Yeah.
Or screen time, whatever it is. Like I want to be on Xbox all day today or whatever. And so if you just say, no, you can't have it, they may try to find workarounds to have it without you knowing. So really you need that conversation is, well, tell me why Snapchat's important to you. Like, tell me about what kind of things would you like to do on Snapchat? Teach me about Snapchat. Like, I'd like to know, right? And so now you have a kid's talking to you about Snapchat, and then you start saying, well, like, are there any downsides to Snapchat? Like, what do you think the downsides are? And start just having a conversation with your kid about this, and then eventually, you can come to some kind of accommodation on how you want to do this. Now, when it comes to Snapchat, I'm not an accommodator. I just say you can't have it. But for most things, we can do this, especially when it comes to screen time limits. The problem with like Snapchat or something like that is that it's not manageable. You have kids who, and if you don't know, you can take images or videos on Snapchat, you can share it with another person, and then those images can disappear, which gives kids the notion that this is private and safe. Snapchat facilitates a lot of stranger interaction with your child. So there's this thing called Quick Add, top right corner of Snapchat. You can open that up and it'll recommend people who are friends of friends and farther out, and you can easily add them. So what we have is kids talking to lots of strangers. We have a lot of drug dealing happening on Snapchat. So drug dealers are blasting messages out to kids on Snapchat saying, hey, we got a great deal on these pills, which disappear off that phone. But if you want to, direct message that person, you can set up a drug deal that literally gets handed off at your doorstep because that person is in your area. And we now live in a world where of the counterfeit pills that the DEA has confiscated in 2022, 60% of them are lethal.
Ooh.
So talk about something you should be concerned about, parents. The number one cause of death for your teen is drug overdose. The number one cause. The number one app to put drugs in your child's hands is Snapchat.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of kids aren't regular drug users. They're just experimenting. They're like, well, this is a Percocet. It's a pharmaceutical. Like, how bad could it be?
Yeah.
And it turns out to be counterfeit, and it's got some fentanyl in it, and it stops your kid's clock the first time. So, like, that's the thing we should be concerned about, as well as their mental health. But yeah, I mean, my website, there's always some new app out there. My website has reviews for the big apps that are out there now.
Mm-hmm.
If you subscribe to my newsletter, we'll send you an email when something pops that you need to know. But yeah, it's the relationship piece with your kid is huge. But at the same time, like as a parent, you need to know why you need to say no to Snapchat. You need to know why you should be saying no to Discord, which is another really popular
Yeah.
app for kids, especially boys who game. And and then you have the open internet, which can expose your kid to pornography, which is also changing our kids in ways that parents don't really understand, as well as just a lot of stranger interaction that can lead to the sexual exploitation of our kids, which is like kind of right now at epidemic levels.
Yeah. Gosh, not an up episode.
Well, no, I
But
mean it's
no, I think the part of it is that like we can't avoid this. We need to talk
yes.
about it. Parents need to talk about it with their kids and can't just stick our fingers in our ears and pretend it's not a problem or it's not going to impact my kid.
Yeah, this can't happen to my kid is like famous last words. So what I tell parents, every parent who goes to my presentation, they all walk out saying the same thing. They say, "Man, am I glad there's no internet when I was a kid."
Yeah.
If you think you wouldn't have done a good job, why do you think your kid could? Right? Your kid is you with the internet. And then the other one is like everybody should have been here. Like this should be mandatory for every parent to hear because parents aren't going to these presentations because it's an after school event and they're tired and they got home from work or whatever and they're like how good is it going to be anyway
Yeah.
I've been to other ones, they're not that great, whatever. I mean, not only is our presentation um informative, like you're going to learn like what you need to do. We don't just horrify you, we actually give you tools. um, but it's presented in a way like our presenters are professional presenters and we tell a lot of stories and like parents in my presentation, they're laughing, they're crying, they're identifying with these stories. And they come out changed. I think that's really our goals. We're looking to change these parents. You can't change a kid into a good decision maker.
Hmm.
You just can't. I mean, you can kind of nudge them towards making better choices, but their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. The part that your brain uses that pump the brakes on a bad
Yeah.
idea, that part of their brain's not going to kick in until their late 20s. I have two boys, 21 and 23. They're not making good choices and they're, adults. So you're, sweet little teen who face to face would never do the things
Yeah.
that happen online that they kind of casually do online. They would never do it in a million years. And it's because the technology removes the sense of consequence. So one of the things when we talk to students is we try to get them to connect in their
Yeah.
adolescent brains. Um, the real world and digital world are the same world.
Yeah.
They
There is no
feel different.
difference.
They feel different. And that's a problem. So children aren't using the decision making part of their brain, the kind of rational cognitive part of the brain. They're using their limbic part of their brain, the fight or flight, the emotional center of their brain. And so therefore they do things that feel real or feel good,
Hmm.
that excite them, right? That's why the risk taking, that's why we do things when we were a kid and like as an adult we're like, why did I ever do that? It was crazy. Um, so they're doing what feels real. And in the presentation with the students, I kind of lay out a scenario for them where I say, look, I go, you and your friends are hanging out at In and Out, getting a hamburger or whatever. And some adult man walks up to you and starts chatting you up and says, "Hey, where do you go to school? What's your name? Can I look at your phone? I want to look at the pictures of you and your friends on your phone." And I'm like, anybody going for that? And all these kids are like, howling,
No.
like, no, whatever. Stranger danger, right? And I'm like, okay, so but when you're online, and I've already asked these kids how many followers do they have. So it's like maybe talking to like middle schoolers. The average kid has like 300 followers. And then I ask them, what percentage of those followers are people you do not know? It's going to be 80 to 90%. And
Yeah.
this is what they're saying, right? I'm not putting numbers in their head. They're like, I'm like, what percentage? They're like 90%. Okay. And how did you let them in? The stranger that you didn't know. And it's based on the image, like the profile image. If it looks like someone I know, or looks like someone my age, is what I should
Yeah.
say. It looks like someone my age, and they already follow someone I do know, a friend of mine online, they're getting in.
Yeah.
That's how you have 90% of those people are strangers. I said, so, okay, so you're telling, and then what are you sharing online? You're sharing who you are, where you go to school, pictures of you and your friends. The same thing that guide In and Out was asking for that you were not interested
Yeah.
in. And they're like, yep, that's correct. I go, okay, so okay, let me just make sure I get this straight. You're saying that you're letting people in your social network, based on an image that you know could be fake, and they all admit it could be fake. That person could be an adult, and you're sharing the exact same information that you said was not safe to share with that adult stranger at In and Out. And could that one of those people be that person? They're like, yes. I'm like, does that make sense? And I'll have a room of like 300 kids, like middle schoolers or high schoolers, dead silent. And they're like, no, it doesn't make sense. And I go, are kids getting hurt? And they're like, yes. And I go, is this a problem? And they say yes. So they admit everything.
Yeah.
And maybe again in that moment when they're there and they're online, they're thinking this can never happen to me. It's just somebody, they're so far away. It's a screen, there's a screen. There could be miles between me and this other person. They're not thinking about how real it is. So that's the problem. We're dealing with kids who think this way, which is super normal. Like if it was you and me,
Yeah. Yeah.
at that age, we would have done the same thing if we had the access. And but the consequences are really really horrible, and parents aren't finding out about it until their lives are or their children's life and their homes imploding because something really sad's happened to their kid.
Yeah. That's awful. Again, if people want to find you online, what's the website again?
Yeah, cybersafetycop.com. And we have a ton of free stuff, handouts for parents, worksheets for kids. You can find out how you can bring me or one of my instructors to your kid's school. We have a free membership and a paid membership you can sign up for. There's online learning for you as a parent, how to be a better digital parent, and also online learning for your child, how to be safer online. And we also cover in our presentations and also online on vaping, marijuana, and fentanyl, which is another huge issue at schools. So parents may have questions about that. So please take a look at that. And you can always email me, Clay at cybersafetycop.com, if you want more information. But yeah, there's just a lot here, and we like only scratched the surface of it. But I just want parents to know that this is something we can manage. We just have to kind of think about it differently now, based on kind of what's happening. And if you're able to do this before your kid has a phone, then your life's gonna be much easier. But if your kid has a phone, it's not the end of the world. Don't try to do everything at once. Take little baby steps. Talk to your kid using something like Our Pact. In fact, if you go to Our Pact, in fact, maybe I'll give you the link.
Yeah.
There, I have a discount code for parents if they want to try it out. You get 14 days for free, and with my discount code, you get 10% off. And it's like the cost of going to like Starbucks once a month. It's like hardly anything, and it helps keep your kids safe. So it's kind of, to me, it's a no brainer. Yeah. So, and there's always something new. So yeah, sign up for my newsletter, and we'll keep you informed. But yeah, everybody who's watching this, I really pray and hope that you have peace in your home, and that and if these are struggles for you, please reach out and ask for help.
Great. Clay, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you.